there's a battle waiting over here. There's a battleground. It's like their army is sitting right there.
Yeah.
Right. All I got to do is bring my troops and we're going to have a fight. So we look at it and say, if this goes to power sale, and it sells in this market, we might be in trouble. The reality is, are there people out there who are purposefully fraudulent? Yes. So I called the real estate agent just to check, like as an anonymous person, to see if the property was in fact still listed for sale. And he confirmed that it was. And I said, well, I understand that it's rented right now. And he let the cat out of the bag because he thought I was a potential buyer. He said, oh, no, there's no problem there. It's family that's living there. Like they've put tenants in, but they're family, so they can go at any time. Well, once I knew that, I talked to the lawyers. I think you'll solve more problems with a little bit of sugar than you will with salt. My friend, would you still like to keep your home? If so, I think there may be a way. Breaking bread with someone, it's listening, right? Paying attention to the core fundamental that I discussed at the beginning, which is people don't want to lose their homes. Welcome back to The Wealthy Lender. This is episode 20 already. I'm Chris Nichilo, licensed mortgage broker, financial literacy leader, and founder of Magnetic Capital Group, Canada's premier private mortgage firm, in my opinion, of course. In today's episode, we're taking you inside a mortgage file that went from legal enforcement to peaceful agreement at a lunch table. What began as a routine power of sale turned into a complicated emotional standoff, complete with fake tenants, family interference, and a borrower who didn't want to lose. But instead of digging in for a costly fight, what we were able to do is find another way. And this episode is about turning conflict into collaboration, playing the long game, and learning why sometimes the smartest move isn't forcing a sale, it's finding a solution.
How this ended up peacefully is wild to me. I don't know where the pivot happened, and I'd really like to know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually so proud of this one. Now it's still ongoing. So we're not out of this one yet, but I'm still proud of it because of the human element to this. There's, the biggest challenge with this one was communication. There's a huge language barrier between us and the borrowers. And, I say that in retrospect because at the beginning I didn't realize, because we would communicate via email for the most part, as we do with most borrowers. And with technology, anybody who has a language barrier can sound like they don't in an email. So, the root of the solution in this case is an understanding that nobody wants to lose their home. So this is a belief I hold that guides the solutioning part of our business, right?
No one wants to leave their home.
Nobody wants to lose their home.
Oh, lose.
And yeah, nobody wants to lose their home. Look, when you think about the borrowers that we deal with, a huge misconception, right? Is that, we're private lenders, so we're lending to like the worst of the worst, borrowers. It's just not the case. Now, are borrowers out there that are desperate or that, that should sell their homes and should not be getting any more financing because there's just no way out and they're not able to make payments and sustain them? Yes.
Well, according to your underwriting, 80% of them should sell.
You're 100% right. There's about 2 out of 10 that we see that I think still makes sense to lend to. And it's so important that we lend to those people, because if private lending goes away, you and I have had this conversation before, if there's no private lending, the market will end up with a lot more inventory on it, which nobody will really like because it'll drive values down. So private lending is so important, and at the heart of um, a default is a borrower who doesn't want to lose their home, because to get to where you can get a private mortgage, you had to have built like 30-40% equity or more, which means you had to save the down payment, you had to get a mortgage and pay it for a while properly. All right, and you had to get some appreciation and those types of things, but it's not overnight. So there's skin in the game. Now, there are lenders out there who are lending, back in the day, we're lending 95 or 100% of the value. And what do you remove there? You remove the skin in the game. So it
Yeah.
becomes easy for a borrower to walk away. So you end up with more defaults and more people just abandoning the property and turning in the keys. That's not us, though. We're at that 70 to 80% of the value. And so we're dealing with borrowers who, first, are the 1 or 2 out of 10 that we approved, and second, have a history of building equity in the property. So they don't want to lose their homes. And when you approach it that way as a lender, I mean, the hammer's on the wall all the time, right? So you could just take it off and be heavy-handed, but we don't take that approach, because I don't think it works as well. Now, in certain scenarios, it works because you've got so much equity, and maybe an uncooperative borrower that's, just not, you can't communicate with them. They're not interested in working with you, and you've got enough equity to say, okay, well, we'll just let the process handle it. But when you're at 70 or 80%, right, it's arrogant to take that approach. And you will get burned at some point taking that approach. I think you'll solve more problems with a little bit of sugar than you will with salt, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, the communication just didn't make sense. I was, reaching out to this borrower.
Can you walk us through what happened initially? Like, well, obviously they stopped paying, and then you said language barrier. So are we saying, like, are we talking broken English or just no English, or?
Yeah, very little English. It was impossible to talk on the phone. Email, we were communicating. They had a broker. They also had a real estate agent that they had solicited to communicate with us on their behalf. Where it got tricky was they were in default for a good period of time before we began the enforcement process. But when we did, we got to a stage in the process where we were looking to take possession, and they installed tenants into the property. So they converted it from an owner occupied property to a rental. Didn't tell anybody or whatnot, but they served notice to us. And the details, and I don't remember every single detail, but I do remember the basics, which is they put tenants in there, and we immediately thought the timing sounded odd. And I remember calling the real estate agent because the property was listed for sale, but now they had put tenants in, or so they had told us. So I called the real estate agent just to check, like as an anonymous person, to see if the property was in fact still listed for sale. And he confirmed that it was. And I said, well, but like, I understand that it's rented right now. And he let the cat out of the bag because he thought I was a potential buyer. He said, "Oh, no, there's no problem there. It's family that's living there. Like they've put tenants in but they're family, so they can go at any time." Well, once I knew that, I talked to the lawyers. I said, "Okay, they told me we have an issue because it's going to be difficult to get them out through the Landlord Tenant Act, even if we know that it's family. It's difficult to go through that process." And so we were staring at potentially a year-long process or more to go through dealing with the tenant issue, right?
Why did you want to take possession if it was voluntarily listed?
Oh, because voluntarily listing doesn't mean you're going to sell, especially when you start realizing maybe the realtor is family, the
Yeah.
tenants
So
are family. So here's what happens. Oh, Magnetic, please don't take my property. I'll list it for sale. Okay, no problem. We can work with that. But we'd like to have input on who the realtor is because you're in default. We'd also like to agree on a minimum price that if you get an offer at or above this price, you're going to sell, because the challenge is we have no authority to sell your property until we take possession. Now, we have to depend on you to sell it. Now, what happens if an offer comes in, it's enough to pay the mortgage, but not enough to make you happy about the sale price and what you're
Hmm.
walking away with?
Right.
Are you likely to sell it, or are you
No.
going to hold it? And if you hold it, how long are we going to do this dance with the interest meter running before we act and take possession? So once you're in default and enforcement and communication is not moving in a direction where we're collaborating, we have to enforce.
Okay, so just so I understand the order of things, you always take possession before putting your own realtor in place. So the fact that they list it with their realtor, that's all going to go away once you take possession every single time.
Well, it can be complicated because you have agreements, and they have agreements in place for listing agreement for a certain period of time. So you have to navigate through all that. The
Okay.
point is, borrowers can do certain things to frustrate the process, but you have to be willing to continue going through it until you get possession, and then you can call the realtor and you can tell them what's happening. You either work with them or you work out a release from the contract that was signed so you can do what you need to do.
Okay, so regardless of whatever listing activity is taking place, you always take possession.
No,
No.
it's dependent on how well the communication is going. Look, it's always better to avoid enforcement, legal enforcement, if you can.
Okay, you just
Okay.
weren't happy with the level of communication that was going on.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, yes, that was part of it. As I said, there was a language barrier, but also um, there was action being taken by the borrower that was not collaborative. So they just went and hired a realtor, but
Okay.
we weren't getting enough information about who the realtor was, if they had a good track record. We hadn't discussed sale price, all of that, right? So it wasn't collaborative. It was they were doing what they needed to do, and that's their prerogative. Remember, we're not in charge yet, but that's why we have to take steps to get in charge.
Okay, and once those steps were taken, then you're like, "Oh, tenants," and then you're figuring out they're fake tenants, and then it gets really
Right. So
multi-level.
you're trying to open up a dialogue with somebody and talk about a collaborative effort to get out of this mortgage, right? Sell the property. We get to a place where they agree they need to sell. We agree they need to sell. So that's a good step. But then they go and list with a realtor without us, right?
Hmm.
Which is fine. Their prerogative. Can't stop them. But when they take that step, now we need to take a step, right? So we take a step, issuing a demand, and start to pursue possession of the property. Well, just as we're getting close to the deadline where we can take possession, remember, whenever you issue a notice of sale, there's a grace period, right? The borrower has a certain period of time to remedy the mortgage, which means to pay it and take back the house, right, or keep the house. So you go through that period, and just before the end, all of a sudden, there's tenants. In fact, if we're playing chess, it's a smart move. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like they
Yeah.
put tenants in, and we can't. It's hard for us to tell, whether the tenant is family or not. So I call the realtor, confirm it, anonymously. Doesn't give us any more leverage though. We still, there's still tenants in there. We still have to remove them. So at this point, you know, I'm faced with a decision again. Do we pursue the tenants, right? Like there's a battle waiting over here. There's a battleground. It's like their army is sitting right there,
Yeah.
right? All I got to do is bring my troops and we're going to have a fight,
Yeah.
right? Or do I back up? Do I back up entirely and go, wait a minute, that path over there, that's going to be bloody. It's going to take time. It's going to take money, interest meter. It's bloody. Don't really want to go there. What's the sugar route? Is there a sugar route?
What's the
So I
sugar root?
back. So I back up. and I send a text to the borrower. And it just says, I can't use names. I don't. I want to protect everyone's privacy. So she said, "My friend, would you still like to keep your home? If so, I think there may be a way." Throw it out there, right? And he responds, and he says, "Yes, I'd really like to keep my house." I said, "Okay. Would you like to meet me for lunch? I'm coming to your city, your town." He says, "Yes, I'd love to meet you for lunch. Please, when can we do that?" We set up a date, not far in the future, and I go to meet this person. He shows up with his, I think it was a cousin. It was a couple guys that showed up with him.
They got ready to meet a private lender.
spoke better English than him. No, it was great.
Okay.
We met at an ethnic restaurant that was their culture.
Okay.
And they were wonderful people. They were wonderful people, very kind, very courteous. I'm sure part of it was a bit of a show. I think they wanted to make friends, you know. They wanted things to go well, but all of a sudden a completely different feel. Like now we're in front of each other and the communication barrier is not so much of a problem. You start to get to know the story behind what happened and why they fell behind and whatnot. Now, this property was in significant arrears in the first mortgage. We're in second.
Oh man. Okay.
We didn't know that part.
Equity's not growing.
No. So I find out that they're in significant arrears. And the property value has dropped from when we put the mortgage on. So we look at it and say, if this goes to power sale, you know, and it sells in this market, we might be in trouble.
Yeah.
So now I'm getting the full picture. This is the big important piece. Like that text to set up a lunch opened up so much more information, right? Like I started to get the full picture of what was going on, not just my mortgage or our mortgage, but the full picture.
Yeah, well, your whole list, you got a holistic view now.
Right. So in the process, the borrower indicates to me that he's from another country and he has real estate in that country. And it may take some time, but he thinks he can liquidate it. And this is where him and his family want to live. And if they liquidate the property overseas, they would be able to significantly pay the mortgage, potentially all the way out to zero. Okay. So my next question to him is, how much can you afford to pay every month? Now you're behind the 8 ball, right? Like that's the problem. You got behind, and once you got behind, you couldn't catch up. But what can you afford on a monthly basis? He gives me a number that's enough to pay the entire first mortgage and the property taxes every month, just not enough to pay our mortgage, the interest to our mortgage. And I start doing the math and I'm thinking, well, wait, if we could pay the arrears to the first mortgage and get on the right, name basis with this borrower, we can be collecting enough every month to keep the first mortgage paid, which protects our position from any power of sale attempt, keeps the property taxes up to date and in good standing, and we can kick the ball down the street, so to speak, to allow for one of a couple things to happen. One, he sells the property overseas, or two, the market helps us, right, and starts to improve. Plus, don't forget, by paying the first mortgage, which is an amortized mortgage payment, you're building equity every month.
Building equity, yeah. Every month goes by, you're a bit more solid.
Exactly. So we go from a complete breakdown in communication, sitting behind a first mortgage that's in arrears that we didn't even realize was in as bad shape as it was, and with a mortgage ourselves that's in trouble, to a text, to a lunch, to a library of information that allows me to start restructuring things.
Yeah, what are the technical steps? Like, how do you go over to the first position lender and what, co-sign, or now you're responsible for it? Like, what happens?
So what we agreed to do to help was we wrote a check to the first mortgage holder to pay the arrears. And once that happens, they can't proceed with enforcement because the mortgage is brought up to good standing. And then we made a deal with the borrower to send us X amount every month as they promised, which, by the way, they've done religiously every month since. And we take that money and we make sure the first mortgage gets paid. So we'll never have the problem of not knowing what's happening with that first mortgage. And we pay the property taxes every month.
Okay, so the stop the bleeding moment was keep the first position lender happy to not trigger liquidation.
Keep them out of power sale. Yeah.
Okay, that was the stop the bleeding for this one. Okay, I got
That's the stop the bleeding. Yeah. Now to mend the wound, is time. We have to wait for one of a couple things to happen. And we're still in that time period right now, but we've stabilized
it. Mm-hmm.
the capital structure, right?
One text.
One text. It's just amazing. And it sounds so simple. But it's not just the one text. It's the text. It's the lunch in person, not a virtual meeting, it's breaking bread with someone. It's listening, right? Paying attention to remembering the core the core fundamental that I discussed at the beginning, which is people don't want to lose their homes. It's a certain level of compassion. There's risk. There's all of these factors, right, that go into getting to a solution in a difficult situation. But the point of these stories, when we do episodes like this, the point is to illustrate, in as real terms as possible, that if you do take, the time to, if you start with a belief that this person doesn't want to lose their home, and how can I get close enough to them to ally, you know, remember in the beginning, what are we after? Win-win. Investor provides money, borrower accesses equity, borrower uses equity to reverse circumstances that are negative and go back to a bank. Win-win.
Yeah. You
got to
say
maintain that.
You say it sounds so easy, but the thing is that, I forget what the mortgage amount one was, but let's say, if I was getting started in lending and I lend someone, let's call it 200 grand or 300 grand, and they fraudulently evade me at multiple levels, like we've laid out here. Listen, the fog of anger would have led me to you were describing the battlefield over there. The fog of anger would have led me to the fog of war. Like if I'm just starting out in this space and I'm just like, what, this guy screwed me in this many ways at this many levels, just evading me. A peaceful sit down is not is definitely not the first reflex.
Well, what's the old adage, right? Keep your friends close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Keep your enemies closer. And listen, we can't villainize borrowers. Again, if you can just root yourself, ground yourself in the belief that borrowers don't want to lose their homes. The reality is, are there people out there who are purposefully fraudulent? Yes. Are they rare? Yes. For the most part, you're dealing with people who don't want to lose their homes. And that is always a gateway to a peaceful, potentially win-win solution. If you bring a firm but fair and compassionate approach.
Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about making miracles
Mm-hmm.
or doing silly things, just looking for a way out that may take more time, but that could produce the proper result. And there are layers of legal agreements and whatnot, which we can't get into here. But there's a way to structure when you get to the tough part is getting to have everybody on one page. If you can get everybody on one page, then I can assure you, with the right legal help, you can paper it and protect yourself properly for whatever you're trying to achieve. But that's not the hard part. The hard part is like you said, can you, despite what's happened leading to a certain point, can you get to that point where you're at a fork in the road and we have to decide, do we want to go to a bloody battle or do we want to do something else? And the only other option is to back off of where you're at, reset yourself, right? And go down compassionate road and see if there's a solution down there. You can always come back to the bloody battle anytime.
Keep options open.
Keep options open.
And
That's the lesson. Keep the options open and try to open new ones.
Yeah.
That's the lesson.
Yeah. Communication was the hidden uncovered value in this deal.
Sure was.
Well, amazing.
So,
Nice
all
one.
right, man. Happy lending.
Happy lending. Bye-bye.
Cheers.